Breaking news tonight as President Trump goes on a firing spree at the Justice Department, removing all of the U.S. attorneys appointed by former President Joe Biden. The president says the move is meant to, quote, restore confidence to have a, quote, fair justice system.
We've got some breaking news tonight that the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Eric Seibert, has told his office he is resigning after increasing pressure from Donald Trump. Sources tell MSNBC that staffers in the office were distraught at the news, some even crying when they found out. Now, Seibert's resignation comes as Donald Trump has become increasingly frustrated that Seibert would not prosecute the New York Attorney General Letitia James on trumped-up mortgage fraud charges. He had refused to charge because his investigation could not bear out the accusations. The resignation came after Trump was asked directly about the issue in the Oval Office just a few hours ago and said, quote, "I want him out."
All right, so buckle up because what I'm about to tell you is genuinely alarming. President Trump just fired multiple federal prosecutors because they refused to bring charges against his political enemies. Let me say that again. Career prosecutors at the Justice Department were told to indict Trump's critics. They said no because there was no evidence of crimes and they were fired for refusing. This actually happened. This is happening right now in America in 2025. And if you know anything about history, you're probably getting some really uncomfortable flashbacks to Watergate and the Saturday Night Massacre when Richard Nixon fired everyone who wouldn't do his bidding. Well, guess what? We're living through a repeat of that right now, except this time it's happening in slow motion, and it's even worse. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Let me break down what actually went down here because the details are wild. Two veteran federal prosecutors named Elizabeth Yusi and Kristen Byrd were working in the Eastern District of Virginia, career attorneys, people who've spent years building cases, following evidence, upholding the law, and they were told to bring charges against Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who's been going after Trump's business empire for years. And these prosecutors looked at the evidence and said, no, there's no probable cause. There's no crime here. You can't just indict someone because the president doesn't like them. That's not how the justice system works. So what happened? They were fired, both of them, gone, removed from their positions for refusing to prosecute someone without evidence. But it doesn't stop there. Before Yusi and Byrd were fired, Trump had already gotten rid of Eric Seibert, who was the acting U.S. attorney overseeing their office. Why? Because Seibert also refused to bring these politically motivated cases. He wouldn't turn the Justice Department into Trump's personal revenge machine, so Trump replaced him with someone who would, a woman named Lindsay Halligan, who was Trump's personal attorney, not a career prosecutor, not someone with decades of experience in the Justice Department. Trump's personal lawyer, and you know what she did as soon as she got the job? She brought the indictments that career prosecutors said were meritless. She charged Letitia James. She charged James Comey, the former FBI director, cases that experienced prosecutors looked at and said there's nothing here. But Trump's personal lawyer looked at them and said, let's do it anyway. CNN called this a slow motion Saturday Night Massacre, and they're not wrong, because what we're seeing is the systematic purging of anyone at the Justice Department who won't turn the DOJ into a weapon against Trump's enemies. And it's not just Yusi, Byrd, and Seibert. Reports confirmed that at least 7 DOJ officials resigned or were forced out within 48 hours. 7 people, including career prosecutors who were leading national security cases, people whose job was literally to protect America from threats. And they were pushed out because they wouldn't abuse their power to go after Trump's critics. Think about what this means. The Justice Department is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to follow evidence wherever it leads, regardless of politics. Prosecutors aren't supposed to care if someone is a Republican or Democrat, if they're friends with the president or enemies of the president. They're supposed to care about one thing, whether crimes were committed and whether there's enough evidence to prove it in court. That's it. That's the whole job. But Trump has turned that on his head. He's made loyalty to him the only thing that matters. If you'll prosecute his enemies, you get promoted. If you won't, you get fired. That's not a justice system. That's a revenge system. And this wasn't some secret plan that Trump tried to hide. He literally campaigned on this during his re-election campaign. He promised to get even with people he views as his enemies. He talked openly about using the Justice Department to go after political opponents. He named names: James Comey, Letitia James, Jack Smith, all the people who investigated him or prosecuted him or held him accountable. And his supporters cheered. They wanted this. They wanted Trump to use the power of the federal government to punish his critics. And now that he's actually doing it, they're celebrating while the rest of the country watches in horror. The New York Times and Politico have described these firings as part of Trump's broader campaign to weaponize the DOJ against political targets. Former special counsel Jack Smith and other watchdogs are warning that Trump is dismantling prosecutorial independence, that he's destroying the guardrails that are supposed to prevent presidents from abusing power. And they're right, because once you establish that prosecutors can be fired for refusing to bring politically motivated cases, you've destroyed the entire concept of an independent justice system. You've created a system where the only thing that matters is whether you're loyal to the person in power. Comey's defense team is already challenging the charges against him, arguing that the indictment is politically tainted. And they're obviously right. This is a case that career prosecutors looked at and rejected. It only moved forward after Trump installed his personal lawyer in a position of authority and told her to make it happen. That's textbook political prosecution. That's exactly the kind of thing we condemn when it happens in authoritarian countries. Except now it's happening here, in America. Under a president who's supposed to uphold the Constitution and respect the rule of law, congressional Democrats are calling for hearings. Legal groups are warning about authoritarian drift. But so far, Republicans in Congress have been mostly silent. And their silence is permission. Their silence is complicity. Let's dig into how bad this really is. Okay, so here's what most people don't fully understand about this DOJ purge. And I mean really don't understand. Everyone's focused on the individual prosecutors who got fired and whether Trump had the authority to do it, but that's missing the bigger picture. What Trump is doing is fundamentally transforming the Justice Department from an independent law enforcement agency into a political enforcement arm of the presidency. He's creating a system where prosecutors aren't judged by their competence or their integrity or their adherence to the law. They're judged by their willingness to do whatever Trump wants, legal or not, ethical or not, evidence-based or not. Let's talk about the Saturday Night Massacre comparison, because it's really important. In 1973, Richard Nixon ordered his attorney general to fire the special prosecutor investigating Watergate. The attorney general refused and resigned instead. So Nixon ordered the deputy attorney general to do it. He also refused and resigned. Finally, the solicitor general, who was third in command, carried out the order and fired the special prosecutor. In that event, that Saturday Night Massacre became a defining moment in the Watergate scandal. It showed the American people that Nixon was willing to obstruct justice to protect himself. It was the beginning of the end of his presidency. But what Trump is doing is actually worse in some ways. Because Nixon was at least trying to stop an investigation into himself. It was self-interested and corrupt, but it was about self-preservation. Trump is going beyond that. He's not just trying to stop investigations into himself. He's actively using the Justice Department to go after his political enemies, to punish people who oppose him, to settle personal scores. That's not self-preservation. That's authoritarian power consolidation. That's using the machinery of government to crush dissent and intimidate opponents. And the people he's targeting tell you everything you need to know about his motivations. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, has been investigating Trump's business practices for years. She brought a massive civil fraud case against the Trump Organization, and she won. The court found that Trump inflated the value of his assets by billions of dollars to get better loans and insurance rates. It was a major legal defeat for Trump. So what does he do now that he's back in power? He has his personal lawyer who he installed at the Justice Department indict James on criminal charges. Charges that career prosecutors said have no merit, no probable cause. But Trump doesn't care about merit or probable cause. He cares about revenge. James Comey is another perfect example. Comey was the FBI director who Trump fired back in 2017 for refusing to shut down the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. That firing led to the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel. It was a huge scandal, and Trump has held a grudge ever since. He's been talking about prosecuting Comey for years. None of the claims were true. Multiple investigations looked into Comey's conduct and found no crimes. But facts don't matter to Trump. Loyalty matters, and Comey wasn't loyal, so now Comey's been indicted. The process by which this happened is crucial to understand. Career prosecutors looked at potential cases against both James and Comey and declined to prosecute. That's not because they were protecting Trump's enemies. That's because they couldn't find evidence of crimes. Prosecutors have ethical obligations. They can't bring charges just because someone wants them to. They need probable cause. They need evidence that would convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And in both of these cases, that evidence didn't exist. So the career prosecutors did their jobs and said no. And that's when Trump stepped in. He couldn't have career prosecutors blocking his revenge agenda, so he got rid of them. Eric Siebert, the acting U.S. attorney, was removed first. Then Elizabeth Yusi and Kristen Byrd were fired when they also refused to prosecute Letitia James. And they were replaced with people who would do what Trump wanted. Lindsey Halligan, Trump's personal attorney, became the new acting U.S. attorney. And suddenly, the cases that career prosecutors rejected started moving forward. Indictments were filed, not because new evidence emerged, not because the legal analysis changed, but because the people making the decisions changed, because Trump installed loyalists who would carry out his orders. This is how authoritarian regimes operate. You purge the professionals who won't do your bidding and replace them with loyalists who will. You create an environment where everyone knows that if they don't follow orders, they'll be the next one fired. And pretty soon, you don't even need to give explicit orders anymore. People just know what's expected and they do it preemptively to protect their jobs. That's the system Trump is building, and it's terrifying. The scope of the purge is also important. We're not talking about 1 or 2 people being fired. CNN reported that at least 7 DOJ officials resigned or were forced out within 48 hours. 7 people in 2 days. And these weren't just random attorneys. These were people leading important cases, national security cases, cases that had nothing to do with Trump's political enemies, but they were pushed out anyway as part of this broader house cleaning, because Trump wants to make sure that everyone at the Justice Department understands the new rules. Loyalty to Trump comes first. Everything else is secondary. And Trump's installation of Lindsay Halligan is particularly problematic. She has no prosecutorial background. She's never been a federal prosecutor before. She's been Trump's personal lawyer. That's her qualification. She knows how to serve Trump's interests. And now she's in a position where she's making decisions about who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. That's an insane conflict of interest. It's like having the defendant's lawyer run the prosecutor's office. No competent legal system would allow that, but we're allowing it. The political context here is also critical. Trump campaigned explicitly on using the Justice Department against his enemies. He didn't hide it. He didn't dance around it. He said the words out loud. He promised his supporters that he would get even with the people who investigated him. And his supporters loved it. They chanted "lock her up" about Hillary Clinton. They wanted to see Trump's opponents prosecuted and jailed. And Trump is delivering on that promise. He's doing exactly what he said he would do. Former special counsel Jack Smith has been one of the loudest voices warning about what's happening. Smith prosecuted Trump for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election and for his mishandling of classified documents. And now Trump is back in power, and Smith is probably on the target list too. Smith has said that Trump is dismantling prosecutorial independence and destroying the rule of law. And he's right, because if prosecutors can be fired for refusing to bring politically motivated cases, then there is no such thing as prosecutorial independence. There's just political power and the willingness to use it. Legal watchdog groups are sounding similar alarms. Organizations that have spent decades defending the rule of law are saying that what Trump is doing represents an authoritarian drift in American governance. They're using words like constitutional crisis and democratic breakdown, and they're not being dramatic. This is genuinely unprecedented in modern American history. We've had presidents who pushed boundaries, we've had presidents who tested limits, but we've never had a president who so openly and brazenly used the Justice Department as a personal weapon against political opponents while firing anyone who wouldn't go along with it. The fact that Congress isn't doing more to stop this is also telling. Congressional Democrats have called for hearings. They've issued statements condemning the firings, but they don't have the power to actually do anything about it because Republicans control Congress. And Republicans, for the most part, are silent. A few have expressed mild concern, but none of them are taking concrete action to rein Trump in. None of them are threatening to hold up nominations or block funding or use any of the levers of congressional power to push back. And that silence is damning, because it means Republicans have decided that party loyalty is more important than institutional integrity, that defending Trump is more important than defending the rule of law. And once that calculation is made, once a party decides that its leader can do no wrong and that no abuse of power is too great to tolerate, democracy is in serious trouble, because the whole system depends on each branch of government checking the others. The legal challenges to these politically motivated prosecutions are going to be fascinating to watch. Comey's lawyers are already arguing that the indictment against him is tainted by politics. They're going to try to get the case dismissed on the grounds that it was brought in bad faith for improper purposes, and they might succeed. Courts generally don't like seeing the prosecution power abused, but even if the cases get dismissed eventually, the damage is done. Comey and James have to hire lawyers, they have to spend money defending themselves, they have to live under the cloud of a criminal indictment. The process becomes the punishment, and that's exactly what Trump wants. All right. Let's break down what actually matters here, because there's a lot to unpack and we need to be really clear about what's at stake. There are 4 core points that explain why this DOJ purge is such a catastrophic development for American democracy. Point number 1, Trump has destroyed the independence of federal prosecutors. The whole concept of prosecutorial independence is that prosecutors make decisions based on facts and law, not based on politics. They're not supposed to care what the president wants. They're not supposed to care what's politically convenient. They're supposed to follow the evidence and make charging decisions based on whether they can prove crimes were committed. That independence is one of the most important safeguards against tyranny, because if prosecutors are independent, then even powerful people can be held accountable. But Trump has obliterated that independence. He's made it crystal clear that prosecutors who won't do his bidding will be fired and replaced with loyalists who will. That's not independence. That's subordination. That's turning prosecutors into political operatives who serve the president rather than serving justice. And once that transformation is complete, there's no real justice system anymore. There's just power. The people in power decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. And they make those decisions based on political loyalty rather than legal merit. That's how authoritarian regimes operate. And that's what Trump is building here in America. The firing of Elizabeth Yusi and Kristen Byrd is particularly egregious because they were doing exactly what prosecutors are supposed to do. They looked at the evidence against Letitia James, they applied the law, and they concluded there was no probable cause to bring charges. That's called exercising prosecutorial discretion. That's called doing your job with integrity. And they were fired for it. They were fired for refusing to abuse their authority. They were fired for upholding the ethical standards that prosecutors are supposed to follow. And that sends a message to every other prosecutor in the Justice Department. If you don't do what Trump wants, you're next. That's not a justice system. That's a protection racket. Point number 2, this is about using government power to punish political enemies. Trump isn't just trying to protect himself from accountability. He's actively going after people who oppose him. Letitia James investigated his business practices and won a fraud case against him. So now she's being indicted. James Comey refused to shut down the Russia investigation and was fired for it. So now he's being indicted. The pattern is obvious. If you cross Trump, if you hold him accountable, if you do your job in a way that disadvantages him, he will use the power of the federal government to destroy you. That's the message. That's the system he's creating. And this has a chilling effect that goes far beyond the specific people being targeted, because when prosecutors and investigators and law enforcement officials see what happens to people who cross Trump, they're going to be much more hesitant to do their jobs. They're going to think twice before opening an investigation into someone connected to Trump. They're going to worry about their careers, their reputations, their freedom, and that fear is going to lead to selective enforcement of the law. Trump's allies will be protected, his enemies will be targeted, and everyone else will just try to stay out of his way. That's corruption. Systematic, institutional corruption, and it's being built into the foundation of our government. Point number 3, Congress is failing to act as a check on executive power. This is where the system is really breaking down. The founders created a system of checks and balances specifically to prevent one branch of government from accumulating too much power. Congress is supposed to check the president. The courts are supposed to check both Congress and the president. And each branch is supposed to jealously guard its own prerogatives and push back when another branch oversteps. But that's not happening. Republicans in Congress are allowing Trump to do whatever he wants. They're not holding hearings. They're not threatening consequences. They're not using their power of the purse or their oversight authority to rein him in. They're just letting it happen. And that's because they've decided that party loyalty trumps everything else. They're more afraid of Trump's base than they are of violating their oaths of office. They know that if they stand up to Trump, they'll face primary challenges from Trump-endorsed candidates. They'll be called traitors. They'll probably lose their seats. So they stay quiet, they go along, they enable, and in doing so, they're complicit in the destruction of the institutions they're supposed to protect, because Congress has the power to stop this. They could hold hearings and put these fired prosecutors on national television to explain what happened. They could investigate Trump's appointments and refuse to confirm loyalists with no qualifications. They could threaten to impeach again if Trump continues to abuse the Justice Department. But they're not doing any of that. They're just watching it happen. Democrats don't have the power to do much because they're in the minority, but they're at least calling attention to what's happening. They're demanding hearings. They're issuing reports. They're trying to create a public record of the abuses. But without Republican support, there are no real consequences. And Trump knows that. He knows he can get away with this because Congress won't stop him. And that knowledge makes him even bolder, even more willing to push boundaries. Because why wouldn't he? If there are no consequences, why not just do whatever you want? Point number 4. This is setting a precedent that will outlast Trump. Even if Trump leaves office in 2029, the damage he's doing to institutional norms will remain. Future presidents are going to look at what Trump did and say, well, if he could do it, so can I. If Trump could fire prosecutors for refusing to bring politically motivated cases, why can't the next president do the same thing? If Trump could install his personal lawyer to run federal prosecutions, why can't the next president do that too? That's how norms erode. One person breaks them, and then everyone else feels entitled to break them too. And before long, the norms are gone completely. They're replaced by raw power calculations and political expediency. Rebuilding institutional integrity after it's been destroyed is incredibly difficult. It takes years, sometimes decades. You need leaders who are committed to restoring faith in the system, who are willing to hold their own side accountable, who care more about the long-term health of democracy than about short-term political wins. And those leaders are rare because there's always a temptation to use the tools that are available. If the Justice Department can be weaponized, why not weaponize it for your side? If prosecutors can be replaced with loyalists, why not install your own loyalists? The logic is seductive, and once institutions are corrupted, it's really hard to uncorrupt them. So what happens next? Where do we go from here? Honestly, the outlook is pretty bleak. The cases against Comey and James are going to move forward. There will be trials or plea negotiations or dismissals, depending on how the legal process plays out. But regardless of the outcomes, the message has been sent: cross Trump and you'll be prosecuted. That message is out there now. It can't be taken back, and it's going to influence behavior across the government. People are going to self-censor. They're going to avoid actions that might anger Trump. They're going to prioritize loyalty over legality, and the rule of law is going to continue to erode. The courts might provide some check on this. Judges can dismiss cases that are obviously politically motivated. They can scrutinize prosecutorial decisions and push back when the Justice Department is clearly abusing its authority. But courts can only do so much. They can't force prosecutors to be ethical. They can't prevent the president from firing people. They can review specific cases and make rulings, but they can't fix the systematic corruption of an entire institution. That requires political accountability. And political accountability requires Congress and voters. Voters are going to have a chance to weigh in on this in 2026. The midterm elections could serve as a referendum on Trump's abuses of power. If Democrats can take back Congress, they could launch real investigations and maybe even impeach Trump again. They could hold hearings and expose what's been happening at the Justice Department. They could refuse to fund certain DOJ activities or attach strings to appropriations bills. But that only happens if voters care enough to make it happen. And it's not clear that enough voters do care. Trump's base certainly doesn't. They're cheering this on. They wanted Trump to go after his enemies, and he's doing it. The real question is whether moderate voters, independent voters, people who aren't deeply invested in partisan politics, whether they're going to look at this and say enough is enough, whether they're going to recognize that what's happening isn't normal partisan politics. It's the breakdown of democratic governance. It's the corruption of institutions that are supposed to be above politics. And if enough people recognize that and vote accordingly, maybe there's hope. Maybe we can start to rebuild. But if people shrug and say all politicians are corrupt anyway, or if they're so focused on other issues that they don't pay attention to institutional decay, then this is just going to continue, and it's going to get worse. The bottom line is this: Trump has purged federal prosecutors who refuse to target his political enemies. He's replaced career professionals with loyalists who will do his bidding. He's destroyed prosecutorial independence and turned the Justice Department into a weapon of political revenge. And he's doing all of this openly, brazenly, without even pretending to respect institutional norms or legal constraints. This is authoritarian governance. This is what happens when democratic safeguards fail. And unless Congress or voters or someone steps up to stop it, this is the new normal. This is America now. A place where the president can use law enforcement to punish his critics and reward his friends. A place where justice depends on political loyalty rather than facts and law. That's not the country we're supposed to be, but it's the country we're becoming, and that should terrify everyone. Stay tuned.